It's a pleasure being with Irina Slav and David Blackman in the episode number 37 of the Energy Transition Podcast. Our topic today is political influence in the world of energy. Please send questions or comments via YouTube chat. With a pleasure, we receive your comments. Let me show, please, the our schedule for today, the topics we are preparing or intended to. So, the presidential runoff in Brazil, collapse of Liz Truss in UK, ongoing price cap, U.S. president. This is David Love this time. America's relationship with Saudi Arabia is very tricky. Probability going happen U.S. elections and something related to Mexico wanted China's military partnership in the south.
Wow.
Yeah. So please let me start with the first one: the coming presidential runoff in Brazil and the impact that may have on the energy picture. I suppose it's for me to start this.
You're
It
the
is.
expert here.
Yeah. Thank you both. I had prepared a table with two columns that comparing. Uh, Let me put in the big size here to see. Compare the Bolsonaro trends and Lula trends in the energy sector in Brazil. So Bolsonaro, for one side, probably he will keep selling Petrobras refineries. We have 14 refineries, and so the intention is to sell seven or eight. Keep selling oil fields onshore and shallow waters, and keep divesting from abroad assets like Colombia, Argentina, and so. This is totally the opposite for Lula trends. He intends to repurchase the distribution company that was from Petrobras and was sold. He says that when to incorporate an electricity company called Eletrobras, was the former state company for electricity. The other side, Bolsonaro probably keep Petrobras focused on oil and gas only, and Lula maybe that some people say that transform Petrobras in an energy company like Equinor, Total Energies, including renewables and alternative energies. So this point is very interesting because we have local content rules in Brazil to uh, development, production, constructions, and probably Bolsonaro will not touch these decisions, so we'll keep market prices decisions. But on the other side, Lula probably will increase local content numbers and with fines and supply chain control, as was in his last president time. Both probably will change board of directors. Is normal. At each 4 years, all directors go home and replaced by new. And in terms of prices, fuel prices, Bolsonaro doesn't like the fuel price with high fluctuation with dollar and Brent. That's the components of our final
Yeah.
price in Brazil. But Lula not only doesn't like this fluctuation, but probably will abandon import parity that we use importation parity in Brazil. And he says that fuel price must be based on internal costs instead of market
Sounds
regulation.
like Joe Biden.
Yeah, exactly. So probably is the motivation they are so close, Lula and Biden. I'm not sure about that, but people say this.
Are they?
So
Oh,
I noticed that the polls seem to be tightening up quite a lot. Lula had a pretty significant win in the first round of the election, but there was a new poll I saw last week that had them showed them essentially tied. Is that really the dynamic in the election that people are seeing?
yes. Probably Bolsonaro is reaching the same number of Lula nowadays, and it's totally unpredictable the result next week.
Interesting.
Wow,
Yeah,
this
yeah,
will be exciting.
yeah.
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 You
But
know, another interesting thing, the New York Times has a story today. I don't know if either one of you saw it, that the Bolsonaro government is so upset with the inaccuracy of the polls
yeah,
that they're considering a law to punish pollsters who publish clearly misleading poll results, which we
yeah,
see so much of in the United States. So that was an interesting thing
yeah,
to me.
that's perfect. Yeah, that's right. Uh, Energy News Beat is good morning for us.
Morning, Stu.
Thank,
There's Stu.
thank you. Okay, maybe go to the second point. Is the collapse of Liz Truss government in UK. 45 days only, my God, in the midst of crisis caused by idiotic energy policies and what that could mean in Europe with writ large. David, please, if you could start with this part.
Well, I guess the great thing for Mrs. Truss is that thanks to her 45 days of service in the prime minister's role, that she now qualifies for a lifetime £129,000 per year retirement fund or annual stipend. So that's cool
Good
for
for
her.
Yeah.
You know, she had a pretty disastrous 45 days, which roiled all the markets there in the country, made the energy or the economic crisis in the UK significantly worse, in large part because of the way the Bank of England and other parts of the finance industry reacted to her proposed tax cuts. And so that essentially she was bullied out of office because the financial people and the Bank of England didn't like the economic policies she proposed. And that's really the untold story by the media here in the United States. So she's going to go now. And I mean, for me, you know, the implications of this are very severe because what it tells us is that the people that control the central banks in these Western democracies may have become more powerful than our elected officials.
They have.
And,
There's
yes,
no way
and of
about
course
it.
that may have been the case for quite a while now, but nowhere has it become more starkly obvious than in the collapse of the Truss government in England. And I think that's a very anti-democratic, small d democratic dynamic in Western society now that you know, somebody's going to have to take a hard look at and see if we really want the people at the Federal Reserve Board in the United States essentially being our government now.
Yeah, Irina, do you have some comments about this?
Well, she did remove the ban on fracking, so she did do something about energy.
Yeah.
But the new PM could, you know, overturn it because there has been a lot of opposition to this removal of the ban. So I really don't know where this country is going.
Yeah, and you know, so much of the economic collapse there really, I mean, you can trace all of the economic collapse in not just England, but across Europe right now to the energy policies that have been adopted in this century that have caused, you know, now resulted in a very predictable shortage of both natural gas and oil that has caused out of control inflation and shortages of pretty much every other product. You know, the manufacturing is shutting down across the continent because of shortage of natural gas, and that means prices are going up for literally everything. And you know, it's especially energy costs. My gosh, I just can't even imagine the punitive utility bills Irina folks in Europe are having to pay right now with these. I mean, I don't know how bad it is in your country, but in some countries, it's just hard to imagine how people are bearing the cost.
It's okay for now, but that's because our household electricity market is regulated by the state. But the funny thing is that under the recovery plan we signed with the European Union, the post-pandemic recovery plan, the previous government that lasted about 6 months committed to liberalizing the household electricity market, which means we're heading in the direction of skyrocketing energy bills, which will result in mass protests because Bulgaria is one of the poorest members of the European Union. You can't just liberalize the electricity market like that, and tie prices to market prices, because you're going to have unrest on your hands.
Right.
So we'll see how this plays out. But for now, we're better than the wealthy Western countries for now.
Is planned thermostat control in Bulgaria and UK? Do they have this control?
You mean smart thermostats?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if we have them here. Not even if there are smart thermostat controls in some places, they're not a general thing. They're not ubiquitous.
Mhm.
I don't know how ubiquitous they are in Europe. I think they are the normal thing in Switzerland.
Right.
I think I saw this somewhere, but I'm not sure about the whole of Europe.
Mhm.
Yeah, and the Swiss government has notified, no, it was Italy. I'm sorry, not the Swiss government. The Italian government has notified their citizens that the government will be controlling the
Yes.
temperatures in their homes this winter.
They'll be checking. Yeah,
Yes,
I
they'll
saw
be
something along
checking,
those
and to the
lines.
extent there are smart meters and smart thermostats, they'll be able to actually control the temperature in people's homes over the winter to keep them at, I believe the equivalent to Fahrenheit is about 60 degrees to 61 degrees maximum
19 to
heating
20
temperature.
Celsius.
Yeah, 19 to 20 Celsius. Yeah.
Yeah, 19.
Well, most of Italy is in the south, so they don't.
Right.
It doesn't really get that cold as it gets in northern Germany, for example.
Right.
But
Right.
it's still winter in a temperate climate, so it's not warm.
So exactly linked to the next point is the ongoing price cap and other crazy things that are coming in Europe. So thermostat, oil price caps. Irina, how do you see this price caps? Is it possible to apply this control?
It's a circus. I really don't think anyone actually knows what they're doing over a longer term horizon. They're just grasping for straws because there has been a lot of talk about solidarity and helping each other, and we're all in this together, and joint gas buying, which not everyone is on board with for obvious reasons, that it will be the big economies that get most of the gas. And obligatory sharing, I think several countries spoke out sharply against this, because imagine, for example, totally random. Slovakia has more gas in its caverns than the Czech Republic, for example. And it would be obliged to share it with its neighbor, even if it doesn't want to. I mean, it really doesn't make sense for any national government. But what I find particularly fascinating is the French president's latest shot at the US, of all countries. I mean, the US, that every European bureaucrat and leader has been hailing as the savior of Europe in these tough times for months. Now, suddenly, they're realizing that US LNG is not really cheap.
Right.
And now Macron has accused the US government, of setting double standards, because natural gas in the United States is so much cheaper than the LNG they sell to Europe. It's mind-boggling. I really don't know how else to describe it. I mean, this either means that he's completely ignorant about the very process of turning natural gas into liquefied natural gas and all the associated costs. But of course, this is not the only reason LNG is so expensive for European buyers. It's
Right.
because it's being sold, most of it, on the spot market. And the European Union loved the spot gas market until very recently.
And why
Suddenly, it's not so good anymore because
why-
it's too expensive.
why the long-term contracts are not applying this situation?
Well, they haven't really had time, and they're not very willing to sign long-term contracts because of the energy transition.
Right.
If you remember back in March, the Germans were quick. Back in March, Habeck went to Qatar to negotiate LNG supplies, and the Qataris sent him home empty-handed because they said they insist on long-term contracts and a special clause that bans German buyers of this LNG from reselling it to other countries in Europe, which is perfectly fine. It's the seller has the right to put these clauses in, and Habeck refused, and they didn't get a long-term contract. They didn't get any contract really.
And that's always been a very, really since the LNG market began in the United States. I'm not that familiar with Qatar, but in the United States, an insistence on long-term contractual arrangements has been a standard part of the business model.
Exactly.
For these multi-billion-dollar LNG liquefaction and export facilities to be profitable. They've made an exception in this emergency situation to do spot contracts for Europe because they're getting a better price than they can get under a long-term agreement in Asia or other parts of the world. But that's not going to last past this winter. I mean, you get past this winter, these suppliers in the United States are going to want long-term agreements. Or, we've had a shift in the United States this year from 70% of our LNG going to Asian markets to 70% going to Europe because of the emergency. We get past winter, and that's all going to start shifting back unless European governments and private buyers are willing to enter into long-term contractual arrangements, because the business model in this business is built around long-term supply agreements. And that's just going to be inevitable. And I know Mr. Macron was looking for a scapegoat because his natives are getting restless with the high prices, which was always going to happen. And so politicians always start looking around for a boogeyman to blame. And the boogeyman in this case is the United States, which, as Irina said, they've all been wanting to rely on as a savior. And as I've repeatedly warned, is probably not the most reliable savior you could lean on. So
that's right.
Yeah,
this
but
was
it's
all
not
very
very smart
foreseeable.
to antagonize this.
Right. Yeah, you might not want to poke the bear too many times.
Yeah.
Impressive. Very good. Please, let's go to the next one. That's I know that David loves this issues related to the Strategic Petroleum Reserve.
Uh,
That was a
Don't we
political
all?
proposal.
yes, don't we all? Yeah.
Yeah, and I have a picture, David, that you can please start with this.
Yeah, so it's really to me getting very worrisome, the level now to which President Biden has chosen to deplete our Strategic Petroleum Reserve. And I wrote a story about this at Forbes late last week. He has chosen to deplete it to just a little more now than half of its capacity. At the same time in which he consistently warns us that we're in a wartime footing, he goes to fundraisers with his big money donors and talks about the potential for becoming involved in a nuclear exchange with Russia, which we all hope and pray never happens. And he's depleting our wartime reserve stockpile of crude oil, which is there for a reason. It's there for a real national emergency. And he has done this strictly for political purposes to try to mitigate his party's losses in the midterm elections that are coming up in 2 weeks.
Market
And we
control.
all know that, and everyone knows that. And, right. Yes, exactly. And he's trying to control the market price for oil on the international market, which is very hard to do. and keep gasoline prices from going back up to the $5 average that we saw in May and June. So it's a very risky game he's playing with U.S. national security. I wish he would stop it. He did say that they're going to start refilling the reserve whenever oil prices get below between $67 and $72 a barrel, which, left to its own devices, this market currently, as it currently stands, as far as we can foresee, those prices that low are not going to be seen for crude oil anytime soon. So we're stuck with a very low level in the SPR, and we just all have to hope we don't have a true, real national emergency that our military needs to respond to.
Because Irina, the intention to have these reserves is for the military crisis, no?
Well,
Not for
any
market.
sort of crisis. I mean, it was created, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, in the 70s after the
Right.
Arab oil embargo, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
So you never know when another embargo might happen, especially now with the relations between OPEC and Washington not exactly the best. But what I found kind of endearing, David, was that when they set this price range at which they will be replenishing the SPR, they said that they will commit to long-term contracts with U.S. oil producers with the hope to entice them to start drilling more now, when
Right.
WTI is well above 72 per
Yeah, it's
barrel.
84
Why
this
would
morning.
they?
And,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know if anyone in the administration doesn't understand or if they just don't care. I lean towards the latter, that marginal drilling sites now, and even in the Permian Basin, which is so rich in shale formations, the marginal profitability for the second tier oil site drilling sites really is probably right at $70 a barrel now, because we've had such incredible inflation in service industry charges and incredible inflation in steel prices, which the oil industry is very heavily reliant on steel, and every other good and services the oil industry consumes in drilling and production activities. So, where a $55 price might have been sufficient 2 years ago during another presidential administration, now it's probably 70 or higher for these second tier drill sites that companies would have to drill in order to significantly increase production. And so a $72 price is not going to entice anyone to drill more wells.
Especially when the current market prices are a lot higher than that.
Yeah,
and
it just makes no
producers
sense.
are interested to keep them this way.
Of course.
Yeah,
That's how you make money.
I saw something related to numbers. Normally, the United States consumption is 20 million barrels a day, and a crisis, military crisis, could be 4 million barrels a day to maintain only the military movements and not the country
Sure.
itself. Is something like this, David?
Well, yes, and that could be the case if you had a true world war breakout or a nuclear exchange on the European continent. You would have shipping lanes disrupted. The normal flow of oil out of the Persian Gulf would likely be disrupted for military purposes. And so if you have a disruption like that, the United States imports 9 million barrels of oil a day. And if suddenly we couldn't import 9 million barrels of oil, it's got to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
And 400 million barrels is what is that? I calculated 44 days supply.
Exactly.
And that just isn't adequate. I mean, the guideline and the regulations that govern the SPR say that you're supposed to try to maintain 90 days supply of crude oil imports in the SPR. And this administration just ignores that. And they had an election coming up, and they were trying to influence an election. And so here we are with a lower level of energy security as a result.
Perfect. Grand finale, expected OPEC to cut production or targets.
Even further. Yes, I agree with that. I am expecting it. The question is, or whether the Biden administration is expecting it and trying to anticipate it, which I
Yeah.
doubt.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think
But
once
it's
the
very
election's
likely.
over, Biden's efforts will stop. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Irina. I interrupted you.
No, that was it.
Sure. Let me read here. Isn't there a law on the minimum level to SPR must be? No.
There's a guideline. There's not a law.
Okay.
There are regulations that govern the usage of it that this administration has simply ignored, like it ignores so many other laws and regulations governing energy. And the guideline they're supposed to try to maintain 90 days a storage level equal to 90 days of national crude oil imports, which would be 800 million barrels. Well, the SPR total capacity is somewhere just above 700 million barrels, which, so they would have to have it totally full to be in real compliance with those guidelines. And, it just doesn't matter to them. They don't care about that.
Yeah, clearly.
Other point that's a very intriguing point is the America's relationship with Saudi Arabia, the very friendship from U.S. president and the Saudi Arabia prince. Yes, David.
Yeah. Well, yes, President Biden has gone out of his way to pretty repeatedly insult the royal family, using the suspicious death of a journalist as his excuse to do so. He came into office with a stated goal of turning Saudi Arabia into a pariah country. He hasn't really succeeded in doing that with the rest of the international community, although I suppose he has sympathizers at the EU and in Canada. But the rest of the world doesn't seem to much care. They want Saudi's oil. China is more than happy to gradually absorb the Saudi government into the Chinese orbit, and an increasing set of alliances and relationships with Saudi Arabia that we've talked about in previous episodes here that seem to indicate that soon enough Saudi Arabia is likely to become part of the BRICS alliance and make that rival organization, which is what it is, a rival organization to the G7, even more powerful than it already is. And I don't say rival in terms of hostility. It becomes an even more powerful force than it already is in terms of geopolitical and trade relationships, and which gives the countries participating in it all sorts of economic advantages over those who are not. And pushing Saudi Arabia into that orbit, into that alliance from a U.S. perspective, it's hard to see how that makes any geopolitical sense at all to me.
It doesn't at
But
all.
yeah, it doesn't seem to, but that is certainly appears to be Biden administration policy. And so, we'll have at least 2 more years of that.
There is a picture or 2 pictures, Biden and the leader of Saudi Arabia, different from Putin and Biden meetings with the Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
Did you see this? Very.
Well, I've seen pictures of Crown Prince Mohammed with Putin laughing about something, and the now notorious fist bump with Biden. He really didn't do well in these visits. Surprisingly to me, I have to admit it, I was surprised that the Crown Prince is actually quite a pragmatic leader.
Yes, he seems to be.
Pragmatism wins every single time.
Yeah, and that's to his credit. He keeps emotional and crass political. Of course, I mean, Saudi Arabia is not exactly a democratic society. Let's be honest about that.
Yeah.
But he is not emotional about any of this stuff, as President Biden often seems to be. Yes. Right, he shouldn't be. And he's quite young. What is he, 35? And so you might expect
something, yeah.
Yeah, and so he's really very mature in how he handles all this. And I wish I
And
could
he
say the
thought his
same thing
father,
about our officials.
his brother as energy minister as well.
Yes,
The other
yes,
Prince Abdulaziz, he's a really smart one too, really smart
right.
leader.
We had a question pop up a second ago
Yes,
there.
sorry, yeah, coming back with them.
Who will Biden blame if the dollar falls through the floor, if the Saudis begin pricing oil in other currencies?
Putin and the
Putin, of course.
Chinese.
Yes, yes.
That's
Yeah, I think
easy.
he'd go with
An easy.
Putin. That seems to be the standard
Yeah.
answer. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And David, are you happy with the probably results of the upcoming U.S. elections? What do you expect to have?
Yeah, well, certainly there seems now, the news media assured us back in August and September that there would be no red wave because all the misleading pollsters that we have in the United States had put out a bunch of polls attempting to influence the election. We call them push polls, that they try to change voter attitudes instead of reflect it. But now that they're all shifting back to try to actually measure voter attitude so they can say they were right about the elections, it's becoming apparent that the Republicans are going to have a pretty good day in 2 weeks. And how good it becomes is anyone's guess. It does look like they certainly will end up with a majority in the House of Representatives. I mean, it's unimaginable that will not end up being the outcome. The Senate is closer. It does look like at right now that the Republicans could end up with 52 or even 53 out of 100 seats in the Senate. And so that will, stop any further huge omnibus spending bills and climate funding bills like the Orwellian named Inflation Reduction Act that was passed in August. And but it won't stop President Biden from continuing to manipulate energy policy with executive orders as he has done. And you have to recognize that my gosh, the spending in the IRA for renewable subsidies combined with what was in last year's $1.9 trillion infrastructure bill is over $600 billion now of big pots of money to fund all sorts of projects. And so all that money is going to get spent, and it will have a very significant impact on the energy mix here in the United States and the reliability of electric grids and just the general energy mix. And whether that turns out to be a good thing or not just kind of depends on how all of that is able to coalesce into some sort of actual workable energy infrastructure that helps consumers rather than harms them.
Irina, which side is much better for Europe in terms of energy in the U.S. elections?
I don't really think it would make much of a difference for Europe. I mean, the best and the only thing that the U.S. can do, not the U.S. As a government, but the U.S. as a place where a lot of natural gas is produced, is to keep sending a lot of this gas to Europe. But
70 cargo ships every day.
But even this won't be enough for next year for the refilling of the storage next summer season and preparing for next winter. I read somewhere that the shortfall that Europe needs about more than 1 trillion cubic feet to prepare for winter 2023. So basically what we're going to see this winter is a teaser trailer of what's likely to happen next year.
Perfect.
Yeah.
We have two interventions here. Let me please put in the screen. If David could drive this.
The first thing the Biden government did was to remove the Houthi rebels from the terrorist list. And they also removed the Patriot missile batteries from Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Yeah, that was obviously not a popular move with the Saudi government. And Yeah, and that's actually a really important point that he's making there, or he or she, I'm not sure, is that it's not only Saudi Arabia that the Biden administration seems to be pushing away in the Middle East, UAE, Kuwait, and some of the other Arab countries that the Trump administration and really the Obama administration had put so much energy and diplomatic effort into improving relations with. This administration has seemed to go out of its way to alienate. And a lot of that has to do with the negotiations over the Iran nuclear agreement, okay? Because Iran is the rival with Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and was funding the Houthi rebels, still is, I'm sure. And so as the Biden administration has so feverishly attempted to get a deal in place with Iran, it has caused it to make a lot of decisions that Saudi Arabia, UAE, and other Arab nations would consider to be hostile or at least unfriendly. And, that's a problem in those relationships.
There's no prospect of a deal with Iran being launched anytime soon.
I mean, yes, Iran's demands are so frankly outrageous that even the Biden administration can't agree to some of them without suffering severe political damage. And
then it's all for nothing.
Right. And it's for nothing at this point.
Someone could have told them. But...
Irina, would you like to drive this question from Doe?
Dallas Morning News endorsed Greg Abbott over Robert Francis O'Rourke, and Abbott has a 10% plus lead over Beto, so Texas ought to safe. Well, good for you.
Yes, I think we can write the political career of Beto O'Rourke off as of this morning. When even the Dallas Morning News editorial board can't concoct some rationale for endorsing the Democratic candidate, he's a very bad candidate.
There is my last point here is a former U.S. Democratic Party leader, Tulsi Gabbard. Do you know him?
Sure, yeah.
She's a former congresswoman from Hawaii, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Democrat.
Okay. Democrat. He said the following: would it be well accepted if Mexico, for example, wanted to make a military alliance with China, compared to Ukraine with NATO, of course? What is it?
Well, it's a fair comparison.
Yeah.
I mean, the internet is full of jokes like this. How would the US react if Russia put military zones all around the US? It's just a mental exercise and nothing more. And jokes, but
yes, one hopes it's just a mental exercise. The Democratic Party has put so much time and energy into demonizing Russia and Vladimir Putin that a Mexico
and the billions.
Yes, and if Mexico wanted to do a military alliance with Russia, you would see an enormous uproar in the American media and the Democratic Party and the Republicans as well. China is a different thing, and has been a different political dynamic within the United States. And I think everyone would have to oppose such an alliance here in the United States, but it wouldn't be with the same feverishness and name calling and hysteria that a potential deal with Russia would bring. Now, I'm not saying any of that's justified. I'm just saying that that's how it's been.
Yeah, but it's not impossible that something like this could happen when you think about it.
That's true.
Yes. It sounds like a hypothetical possibility, but who knows in this?
Who knows?
Right.
In this day.
Right.
Yeah. So, Irina, let's give David a good vacation time. Going to Europe to help David. Macron and Scholz and
if you could put some sense, if you have to.
I'm going to think as little as possible about all of that while I'm on vacation.
Yeah.
So we are going to have a 2 weeks break, waiting for David return.
Who knows what?
Well, yes, we'll miss next week, but I'll be back the following week.
Great. thank you so much for this nice conversation. There is another question here we'll put because in respect of people that are following us.
COVID on a cruise. That's too Turley. Yes, we actually have to take COVID tests today. We have to be able to show a negative COVID test result within 48 hours of debarkation. So we will be taking our test around noon today.
Well, good luck with that.
Yes,
this is why I'm staying
feeling
home.
pretty good.
I'm not going anywhere until this is over.
Yeah, good vacation, good week, and thank you so much.
Have a great week, both of you.
Thanks. You too.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And thank you to all the viewers for the questions.
Yes, thanks for lots of great questions today.
Yeah.
Keep them coming.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.